This is Salam Radio, Peterborough's Muslim community radio. Broadcasting on 106.2 FM and online.
Hello and welcome to Salam Radio 106.2 FM. You're listening to Faiza from Raham Project. I'm your local midwife sharing midwifery insights with you. Now, if you are listening in and you want to get in touch with us on the show to share your experiences, please feel free to call us on 017 33 602 133. You can alternatively text us on 07 411 191 062. You can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk or comment on our Facebook thread at Salam Radio. It will also be shared on our social media posts on Raham Project. So welcome everyone to today's special show, and we are going to be talking about pregnancy sickness and hyperemesis gravidarum, also known as HG to most people. And today we have a really special guest. Her name is Charlotte Howden. Now, she's probably listening, and I'm going to invite her into our live in a few seconds, but I want to give a brief description about who Charlotte is. So Charlotte is the CEO of Pregnancy Sickness Support. Now, we'll be discussing the challenges of pregnancy sickness, the severe impact of HG, and the disparities in support for families from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Charlotte has been a campaigner and trustee for pregnancy sickness support since 2018 and is well known for presenting and producing the world's first documentary about hyperemesis called Sick, The Battle Against HG. Charlotte joined this charity as a CEO in August 2023 and is passionate about progressing the charity further and building on the legacy of her previous COO and charity managers. She has over 20 years experiencing in marketing, business and PR and is a law graduate. She suffered herself with hyperemesis and is determined to utilise her years of business experience to develop the charity further and help sufferers both physically and mentally based on the aspects of the condition that they've experienced. So I'm going to welcome Charlotte onto this live. Charlotte, can you hear me?
Good afternoon, Faiza. I can. Thank you for having me here.
Oh, Charlotte, you are so welcome. And you know, you were our first person calling us via the phone. So I was a little bit apprehensive thinking, I wonder how this is going to work. So I'm so glad I can hear you right now.
So am I. It's very unnerving when you're waiting to see if it's going to work.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being prompt and turning up. But I've got so many questions, Charlotte, about pregnancy sickness today. And I'm sure you've got so much insight that you can share that families will find very, very useful.
I'm hoping so. Yeah, I do hope so.
So shall we start with the basics then, Charlotte? I guess what I probably want to start off and ask you is, can you explain what pregnancy sickness is and how is this different from hyperemesis gravidarum?
Yeah, sure. That is the best place to start. So, look, we, as you can tell by the name of the charity, we use the term pregnancy sickness, and we use that term because there is another term that is widely used, which is, of course, morning sickness, which is very popular in our language today. But really, pregnancy sickness is something that, 7 out of 10 women will experience during pregnancy. And I think it's important to make that point because when we use terminology like morning sickness, it kind of gives off a different experience of what women are actually going through. Now, morning sickness, as it has been known for a long time now, women who are pregnant and experience this sickness, they are slightly more likely. Some research has shown to, be sick and feel nauseous in the morning. However, it is something that can continue throughout the day and it can start at any time during the day. So pregnancy sickness, obviously completely linked to the fact that you are pregnant. And it's very, very likely, like I said, 7 out of 10 women will experience some kind of pregnancy sickness and or nausea during the initial stages of their pregnancy. So pregnancy sickness in itself, it's still not something necessarily that's very nice to experience, but we often hear from women that we talk to that having that experience early on is a positive sign. It's almost welcomed, like you feel like, okay, this pregnancy is, a good pregnancy, it's a strong pregnancy, I'm feeling all of these things that I was expecting to feel, like the nausea and perhaps some sickness. But with usual pregnancy sickness, that is what we would probably call mild. So in terms of thinking of a spectrum almost of sickness, if you've got normal pregnancy sickness, you'll probably have, short bouts of mild nausea and or occasional vomiting. It really shouldn't have an impact on your mental health. It really shouldn't have a negative physical impact, and typically can be managed through things like diet and lifestyle changes. So, for example, if you tend to feel really nauseous in the afternoon, then you might, try and have a little bit of food earlier on so you've got something in your stomach, or you might find actually waiting until after that afternoon period is the best time to eat. So it's really something that can be managed and typically kind of starts to dissipate around the 12, 13, 14 week mark. So hopefully that's what most, if any, women listening today, hopefully that's what they've experienced, because hyperemesis is a completely different condition and is very much at the other end of the spectrum and is characterized by severe nausea and or vomiting, and has a whole host of other symptoms that comes with it, and is incredibly debilitating.
Oh, Charlotte, that was really in-depth, and I'm sure really useful for people who are out there listening. And it does sound like it's incredibly challenging, hyperemesis, and I will probably shed some light and say, when I have cared for women who have had hyperemesis, it's apparent that it's very debilitating for them, and it impacts them to manage their daily lives how they normally would manage it. But what I'm interested in, before we talk a little bit more about hyperemesis, is why do you think many women believe that pregnancy sickness is just a normal part of pregnancy? And I guess you said 7 in 10, so I guess that is. But even with hyperemesis, there's probably some degree of normalization around feeling like that. But why do you think that is?
Ooh, that's a really great question. I think personally, if I think about my own experience, so happy to say I'm 41 now. Now I know I did have hyperemesis, but my early childhood, teenhood, young womanhood, the narrative around pregnancy was very much, if you looked at the TV or you read books, that kind of thing, was very much like it's just this kind of welcome thing. Like you said, it's expected, it just happens. But the way it's portrayed is, really quick. It's like a couple of times being sick, and that's how a woman knows that she's pregnant. Not that we're tracking our cycles or understand anything else about our body. It's just because we've woken up one morning and we've been sick, and that's it, we're pregnant. So I don't really have an answer to that, Faiza, because I just think it's almost become part of our societal DNA that this is just the norm and you get on with it. And I think that's quite typical, as I'm sure you'll know in your profession, in a lot of areas with women's health.
Yeah, I completely hear you, because one of the things that I have experienced when it comes to sickness, and when you've just mentioned about how it's portrayed in the media, for example, if you were ever growing up in an Asian household watching Bollywood movies, you would know the woman is pregnant because she'd put her hand on her mouth, pretend like she's going to vomit, and then run away, and everybody's got their mouths open and gasping like something's going on. And you're right. It's really played on, and similar to birth as well, it's played on like it's the most intense and traumatic and horrible thing, and you're lying in stirrups. But actually, that's not always the case. It could be part of it, and it doesn't have to be like that. There's probably ways of managing it, and I think we're going to get on to some of those conversations as we move forward. But maybe tell me a little bit more about how hyperemesis actually impacts the daily lives of women who suffer from it.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, to say, because I don't want to scare anyone who might be listening and is pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant. So hyperemesis will affect between 1% to 3% of pregnant women a year. So at the real kind of top end of that, it is still a big number, and that's why people need to take interest in this condition. So we're looking at around perhaps 30,000 women a year, but it is at that kind of 1 to 3% risk, I suppose. So if you think about the mild nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, which is quite usual, hyperemesis is really the most extreme version that anyone could imagine, and then some. So it could be, vomiting up to 30 times a day. It could be consistent and persistent nausea, so much so that even sleep doesn't enable any relief, because of the very fact that women aren't able to eat anything. And I really should say at this point as well, because I think it's important, is that, when you start with some kind of pregnancy sickness, women do know, the lifestyle changes that they kind of need to make, right? So they might eat more, eat little and often, they might try kind of herbal remedies, they might change their daily patterns a little bit, but with hyperemesis that is not possible. And changing your diet, trying to find other things to eat that are a bit more palatable, women just really cannot keep anything down. And on the more extreme cases, that can also include fluids. In fact, water, some women will find that water is impossible to keep down, but they might be able to stomach something like a flat Coke or, flat ginger ale. So if you can imagine going from a human being who enjoys their life, enjoys their work, enjoys their family, enjoys cooking food for their family, may have other children already, to suddenly have everything pulled out from underneath them because they either cannot stop vomiting, or the nausea is so debilitating that they are essentially bedbound because the slight movement, the smell of somebody else cooking downstairs, the smell even of your own children, your pets, your partners, the aftershave they might wear, the deodorant they might wear, that kind of thing. Every single thing in your environment becomes something that can trigger you, and that can be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's really, as someone who's experienced it, I can honestly say it was torturous, because all the basic necessities of life that you take for granted are just very suddenly taken away. And this is at a time where you're supposed to be filled with joy, possibly, also things like anxiety, especially if it's the first pregnancy. All pregnancies are a blessing, but, sadly, we do know that not all end up being able to go to full term. But it's a time of family and enjoyment, and all of that goes away. And you really do feel like you are completely isolated from the life that you had before. And it's impossible to think about how you are going to continue to wake up every day and start a new day having to go through this. So it is a difficult one to describe sometimes, because I think a lot of people may have had, really bad food poisoning. And it kind of is like that, but it's different because it is more extreme than that. And there's no end date. We cannot say to any woman who has hyperemesis, it will finish at this time. It does tend to peak around 13 weeks. And it kind of, for some, will improve around the 16 weeks. For others, it could be 24 weeks. And for other women, it can be for the entirety of the pregnancy. So when you put all of that together, Faiza, you can just appreciate how horrendous that experience is. And, the weight loss that you will suffer, dehydration, mental health impact. There's so much to unpack there, but hopefully that kind of gives a bit of an overview of what HG can be like.
No, I completely hear you. And it's so important to talk about these things, because I definitely know from speaking to women within our diverse communities that sickness and hyperemesis in general can be really normalized. And HG is something that, like I said, can impact your life, like you are also explaining to people who are out there listening. I want to ask a question about, say, if in your early pregnancy you did have extreme sickness, you had to get treatment for it, and then as you get to the middle of pregnancy, it starts to disappear. Does that still mean you had hyperemesis?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the way that hyperemesis in itself is on a spectrum as well. So like you say, you could have to get treatment and intervention from doctors, midwives, etc. And perhaps you're on medication, perhaps you're going for weekly fluids to have, fluids put back into your body because you're dehydrated. That is not usual for pregnancy. That is not something that should happen and will have an impact on your life. And again, similarly, some women actually don't ever vomit, they don't ever be sick, but the nausea is consistent. And again, that is not usual for usual pregnancy sickness. And that medical intervention as well will obviously help alleviate some of those symptoms, which will give you the opportunity to kind of get better from it, because you are obviously able to give yourself nutrition and have water, whatever you can continue to take. And yeah, for some women it will just naturally dissipate, and for others it won't do. It's about 1 in 5, we think, will continue with HG for the entirety of the pregnancy. So yeah, definitely. I think what I want women and their families, partners, support networks to understand is that if she does naturally get better, even with medical intervention, but what could happen, for example, is you could be taking medication and then you think, actually, I'm starting to feel much better in myself with the medication, and I'm wondering if maybe I want to try and come off this medication because I am now in my second trimester, and you might, reduce your dosage or take less tablets a day. And if you continue to feel better, you think, okay, actually, I don't need the medication anymore. I've naturally kind of come through HG. That's a situation that can happen, but it doesn't take away the fact that what she has experienced previous to that wasn't horrendous, and those symptoms that I'm describing would definitely be characterized as HG.
Such a good point to make, that if you've had it, you have had it, and if it gets better because you're on treatment, it's actually a good thing, because the issue that was bothering you is being resolved, as opposed to it's been resolved and you didn't actually have it. Because there's often a lot in pregnancy when women experience things that symptoms can be downplayed or experiences can be downplayed. So it's really important to acknowledge it for what it is. And
it is. And sorry,
you go.
I come back to learn about this all day. I just wanted to mention as well is that obviously when you are pregnant and you are presenting with things like nausea and vomiting, doctors should also be checking that it isn't something else. So, for example, you have a gastro issue, or like I said, you have caught, you've had food poisoning, or you've caught some kind of other bug. They should be checking for that. But as we all know, anything like that will kind of resolve itself within a week, maybe maximum 10 days if it was a really bad bug. Whereas hyperemesis, obviously, it will continue on. There isn't that kind of a week to 10 day situation. We're talking, the first trimester into the second trimester.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, we would love to hear from people who are listening about their experiences of pregnancy sickness. So please do join the conversation either by calling on 01733 602 133, texting us on 07411 191062, or you can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk. I want to probably move forward and ask you, because it sounds incredibly tough, and you've mentioned quite a lot that there's treatment available. So what are these treatments? What does that look like to somebody struggling with hyperemesis?
Yeah, sure. So another interesting point, and I think we, when we first spoke, Faiza, we kind of mentioned this, but what's very interesting about pregnancy is that, and particularly hyperemesis, is that it starts in early pregnancy. So we do have, women really kind of having that positive pregnancy test, and then within 2-3 days of hyperemesis is, full onset of those symptoms. And early pregnancy is still a time where you would go to your GP. So you won't have met your midwife yet, your community midwife, or however it operates in your area. That tends to happen maybe 9, 10, 11 weeks pregnant. So this early stage, you are very reliant on primary care, which is typically your GP. So GPs do have options. There are medications that they can prescribe. We kind of look at them as first line, second line, and third line. GPs have the opportunity to prescribe first line, and that is typically medications which contain, they're typically antihistamines and perhaps with a vitamin B6 as well combination. They've been used for many, many years, and the reality is they're not licensed for use in pregnancy. I do have to say that, but I also have to counter that by saying there's really no drugs that are generally licensed for use in pregnancy because we don't test medication on pregnant women. So it's a bit of a weird situation to be in where we do have these medications available. We know they're safe because they have been prescribed for many, many years, but technically they're not licensed for use in pregnancy, and they weren't developed for hyperemesis gravidarum, but they work. And those first line medications are typically this kind of antihistamine vitamin B6 combination. So GPs can prescribe those. Depending on how women get on with those, and we always advise, it's like any medication, give it a go, but realistically, I think after 48 hours, if your symptoms haven't changed at all, it's probably fair to say that particular medication is not having an effect on you. And this is where it's really important, I think, Faiza, to say is that this experience of being pregnant and taking medication is a very unique one because women don't want to do that. When I first got pregnant, I was very much okay, I'm going to be really healthy, I'm going to take lots of walks. I had all these plans of things that I was going to do, and taking medication was definitely not on that list at all. So it's a conversation that you need to have with your doctor, a really open and transparent one, looking at all the medication that's available, trying different things, because the most important thing that we need to do in this situation is get mum healthy, get her nourished, get her hydrated, and get her physically able to have some kind of life that it doesn't end up massively impacting her mental health. So that's the really, really important bit. So those medications do exist, and I think from my own experience, I tried 3 or 4 within a 2-3 week period that just didn't sadly touch the size with me. And I then was moved on to what we call second line medications. And depending on where you are in the country, it's a bit of a trust postcode kind of medication lottery, I suppose. But depending on where you are in the country, some GPs can prescribe second line medications, some can't. And it might then mean that you'll have to go into, some kind of consultant-led care within an early pregnancy unit or a similar unit within a hospital to try those kind of second line medications. So in other words, there's lots of different options, but it really is a bit of a journey of finding out what works for you, what helps, and that will be different for every woman. So that's why it's kind of a bespoke situation.
That's a really good thing to mention, that it is unique to each individual when they're pregnant, because I've definitely experienced there's certain medicines that work really well on some mothers, whilst on another mother that doesn't work, and you've got to try different things. So the hope is if you try and find the one that works for you, that there is going to be some sort of solution out there that can help you manage your hyperemesis. Now,
yeah, absolutely.
Regarding the treatments, we've got 5 minutes till we get to halfway point and we'll be taken out for an advert. But what I'm intrigued to find out is there any information out there that women can look at to find and use as a resource? Because I definitely believe that when somebody sometimes experiences something that's very unique, often they end up learning more about it than even healthcare professionals. So is there somewhere that women can go to get this information? Because if she's experiencing it, she's going to have probably Googled and try to find out as much as you can. And she'll probably come to me and say to me, do you know, this is a good idea. I read about it. And then I will start having conversations and wanting to learn and figure out how we get that solution put into place for her. So is there anywhere that women can go? And I'm going to give you 10 seconds to answer this because our ad break is coming up.
Absolutely. Our website, so that's www.pregnancysicknesssupport.org.uk, and we have all that information available.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So we are counting down. We've got 40 seconds to go till the advert break. And I am going to let the listeners know that we're talking to Charlotte from Pregnancy Sickness Support. And if you're out there and you're interested, or if you've experienced it yourself, or if you want to know more about it or tell your friends and family about this live show that we've done, please let them know that it will be available online. I've got lots of conversations I want to delve into after the advert break, which I'm sure Charlotte's got a lot of insight that she'd like to share as well. But for now, you're listening to Faiza and Charlotte at Salam Radio, and we will see you again in a few short seconds after this ad break on Salam Radio.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Zohar Azan. This Azan is sponsored by UK Islamic Mission, serving humanity since 1962.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير. رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
اللهم صل على سيدنا
Peterborough's community radio station, Salam Radio, 106.2 FM.
Hello and welcome back to Salam Radio 106.2 FM. You're listening to Faiza from Raham Project. I'm your local midwife and the founder of Raham Project. And I am talking to the lovely Charlotte from Pregnancy Sickness. And we've been having quite a good conversation around what pregnancy sickness is, how hyperemesis is a different condition to just pregnancy sickness as it stands alone, and what sort of treatments you can access as women and families out there if you know someone that's struggling with it. Charlotte mentioned just before the break as well, when it comes to treatment and what line of treatment you can have access to, you can actually find that online on their website. And I will second that I have used this website quite a lot and shared it with quite a lot of families when it comes to first line treatment, second line treatment, and what is out there, including the side effects, which I think is so important for families to know about, because you know, it's good to know what we're putting into our bodies and to make a real choice about what we feel is the right thing for us. So, Charlotte, I am learning so much from you, and honestly, thank you so much for joining. Now, we're moving on to the second half of our program, and I'm really keen to talk about this very important topic, because when I first spoke to Charlotte, we spoke a lot about the disparities in support for families from ethnically diverse backgrounds. And I feel like we could have probably spoken about it for much longer than we actually did. And we're going to save it for our live now and talk about it so that you can all hear about it. But Charlotte, can you shed some light on this issue? So the disparities in the support for families from ethnically diverse backgrounds, what are your feelings around them and having access and care and support when they are struggling with hyperemesis?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, hyperemesis is not this unique condition that somehow doesn't get swept up into the disparities that we know exist within maternity in particular. That's just not the case. It is the same situation. I think the knowledge that we do have, so I suppose the first place to start really is that within women's health, and particularly hyperemesis, there's not been a lot of research done. And you know, the pessimist in me says, well, the cynicist is, well, you know, nobody really cares that women are just kind of throwing up, because as you said quite rightly, Faiza, you know, that's expected in pregnancy. So we don't have this huge like research portfolio around this condition. And so when that happens, naturally, when some research does occur and they just look at women and they don't look at proportionality, they don't look at representation, they don't look at inclusivity, any results that we get from that, you know, is fantastic because we have so little research on this condition. But ultimately, it lets society down because it's not the full picture. And that's what's happened within HG research as well. Having said that, though, what we can do is look at research that has taken place that wasn't looking to answer any questions about disparities, but where race and ethnic backgrounds were recorded. We can look at that data, and that does clearly show us that women from, and this is the term that was used in the research, which is why I'm using this term, from Asian backgrounds. So again, that term is a very big term, isn't it? It doesn't really even indicate certain parts and communities. But women from an Asian background are more likely to be hospitalized for hyperemesis when compared with white women. So when we take that, and again, there's no drilling down into that because that particular piece of research wasn't looking at all into disparities. But when I look at that as the CEO of the charity, I say to myself, well, that is a clear indication that there's a communication breakdown here, potential and most likely unconscious bias in terms of not believing women. And when that happens, in my experience, the first thing that happens is that woman suffers more, and therefore their symptoms get worse, which would then mean that they are more likely to be hospitalized. So the reality is with HG, if you want to, we don't have a cure for it, but we do have treatments like the medications we've talked about, and also having access to IV fluids, because I don't know if you've ever been quite seriously dehydrated before in your life, Faiza, but I have, and it's impossible to get better when your body is in that state, and you need those fluids to kind of get you back on your feet. So if you're not being believed and being dismissed, and therefore not getting access to treatments that you should be, or you should be offered and have a conversation about, then you are, of course, more likely to suffer more, and then that's going to impact the symptoms, and they're going to become more severe, and then, of course, you're going to end up in hospital. So that's my current feeling around this, is that it's likely that women aren't being listened to, and the reasons for that are likely to be around unconscious bias, as we have talked about before. And, you know, I do want to caveat that with, in particular, this condition is dismissed anyway. So there's lots of white women who will be dismissed for this condition because everyone just thinks that pregnancy sickness is normal, or it's morning sickness, and try a bit of ginger. So that's happening anyway. But then when you start looking at marginalised groups based on ethnicity, and we look at the data across the UK, particularly within maternity anyway, that's going to be happening, it's my belief, on a bigger scale due to ethnicity, for all the reasons that I've highlighted. So it's a very, very serious point, and it's something that as CEO I'm desperate to change, not just for certain marginalised groups, across the board for all women, that when we walk through that door, we're not told you've just got morning sickness, an actual conversation happens. Then particularly when we look at marginalised groups, that we are sensitive to culture, that we are sensitive to situations, that we are sensitive to women who, you know, English might not be their first language, etc., etc. And we have a proper, we've used this word before, but the woman who sits in front of you is bespoke. They are different, they are unique, and they deserve to be treated in that way.
What an important point, that, again, treating them as individuals. And just in Asia alone, they have a population of 4.6 billion people, and that covers 46 different countries. So really, that is such a vast area, and hard to then really pinpoint, really, isn't it, which communities possibly are struggling more with this condition. And it sounds like there's not enough data there. And I'd be curious probably to ask, you know, what's happening with our Black Afro-Caribbean sisters out there? Are they experiencing it to a similar level? I definitely... Yes, go on.
Sorry. No, I was just going to say, absolutely. Yes, they are even more likely than Asian women to be hospitalised. So it does follow, you know, the trends that we see within maternity already, especially with reports like the Embrace report. So that does exist. And what I can say, though, is a positive thing, is that there is currently research going on to specifically look at this, and not as a kind of offshoot of another bit of research where they've just collected people's, you know, ethnicity and characteristics, etc. They are specifically looking at this so that we can get those answers, because, as you said, using the term Asian actually it isn't particularly helpful, because we can then not pinpoint certain groups like you highlighted. So it's a really generic catch-all kind of term that then doesn't actually treat people as individuals, as you also mentioned.
You also mentioned about how it's really important that we see them as individuals, and I guess that's one of the ways that people can help address these disparities. But what can mothers do, or what can their families do if they're experiencing HG and they're struggling to get access? What sort of tools and resources do they have that they can use to support themselves, to advocate for themselves?
Sure. So, again, Pregnancy Sickness Support website has a lot of information that is available. However, we also have a national helpline, and we also have an email service and a WhatsApp service. So however you like to communicate, and perhaps if you are currently suffering, you know, it's very difficult to pick up the phone, so you might need someone else to do that for you. We can speak to families, partners, mothers, brothers, sister-in-laws, whoever needs to contact us. And we have resources that we can email you, that you can download, and we do find that works. If you can go in and say, look, I've had to inform myself on this condition because I'm suffering so bad and I need some help. And I've spoken to pregnancy sickness support, or perhaps you've spoken to another doctor, and we can give you those resources that kind of give you the talking points to mention, to hopefully give you that knowledge to be able to go in and say, look, hang on, this isn't just usual pregnancy sickness. There's something that we have on our website, and I can't believe this, but it is actually called this. It is actually called the puke score.
Tell me about this.
I mean, I don't know who decided to call it that, but it's essentially like a score, you can go through the questions that the puke questions that are there, and you can score yourself essentially. And if you score a certain amount, then it kind of indicates that yes, you are suffering from something that is not usual pregnancy sickness. So let me just I'm actually going to find it, and then yes, it is on our website, and it kind of just asks you to circle your answers to certain questions, such as, on average in a day, for how long do you feel nauseated or sick to your stomach? So you would answer that, and it goes on about vomiting, and it also talks about retching or heaving, because that's something else that women will suffer with. And then it gives you a score, and then it says, yeah, okay, very likely that you are definitely suffering from more than usual pregnancy sickness. So even just something like that, and saying, look, this is a recognized emesis score. So puke actually stands for pregnancy unique quantification of emesis and nausea. So that's a bit of information. You can go in and say, look, I've taken this is what my score is, I don't think this is usual, and taking other resources as well that we can give you. But it's still hard, right? It's really hard to advocate for yourself, especially if you're vomiting 30, 40 times a day. It's almost impossible to sit in front of someone and try and argue your case.
Yeah, because you feel so vulnerable and so tired from just having to manage the feelings of the sickness, that it's not always easy. And I guess this is where your family members or your loved ones are really important, where you get them on board and you get them to advocate for yourself. And it's interesting because when you were mentioning about having IV fluids, and having the IV fluids helps you kind of come back to a baseline so that you can get relatively okay enough so that then the medicine will work better. It kind of made me think, because my brain was thinking whilst you were talking, it made me think of times when I went to Pakistan and I was dehydrated and it felt disgusting. It really was not the nicest experience ever, but very common there for people who live in the West and travel over to visit family, for us to be given IV fluids as a very regular, I'm going to kind of say like Smarties. They give it to us like Smarties in Pakistan. And it's interesting because every time you'd have the fluids, you would always feel so much better. And women often say this as well, when they come in and they've had the fluids, they often, after probably half a day period, they'll be like, I feel so much better. Like I feel like I've got on top of it. So one of the things I've definitely noticed is, I know it's really difficult to keep food down, but trying as best as possible to keeping yourself hydrated is actually really important. And once you get on top of it, try to stay on top of it, because sometimes I think what I've experienced is women think that they've got on top of it and then they lapse with the medication and they lapse with the treatment, and then they're back to, the original point of discomfort that hyperemesis gives. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's very similar to, when you get a prescription for antibiotics and they say, look, take the whole prescription. When you start feeling better, don't stop. And I'm sure so many people start taking those and think, actually, I'm all right now. I feel better. And the point is that you have to finish that prescription, don't you? You have to continue with the full dosage and the full medication. And it's exactly the same with hyperemesis. You need to continue on anything that you've been prescribed. And like you said, that kind of baseline, though, is really important because, as you can appreciate, most medication is oral. So if you are still being sick, it's impossible to keep that medication down. And so sometimes just having the fluids kind of gets you to that baseline. You can start taking your medication again, and you have that kind of brief period to be able to keep everything down. The body gets used to it, and you just need to carry on with that. And again, this comes back to having that conversation and that relationship with your GP where you can say, oh, I'm thinking of, I don't know if I need these anymore. And then you can come up with a plan if you'd like to kind of, lower your dosage or come off medication. But it really does have to be monitored, because it's not worth going back into that situation again where you then start being sick, then you become dehydrated, and it kind of starts again. It's a bit of a vicious cycle, really. So it's very important
to stay on top of it. And you know what's really kind of endearing is one of my friends just messaged me a picture of medicine that she's taking for hyperemesis, asking me, is it safe for the baby? And I'm going to tell her, if she's listening, go to the Pregnancy Sickness Support website. They have a whole list of the drugs, plus, their side effects. So read that, and that's where you'll get your information from. And, it's very common that women struggle with HG within our communities. And this is exactly how our community navigates it. We talk to one another and try to figure it out. And there's a space where we need to get comfortable talking to healthcare professionals who have the access to the medication that we do need. So I definitely want to say that if you're listening and you're out there, don't be scared to speak up for what you are feeling. It's really important. If you're feeling it, you know what you're going through. So speak up for yourself and speak to people who have access to this medication. And if you can't do it yourself, speak to a friend, come to Raham Project and we'll support you, or go to Pregnancy Sickness Support and we'll support you. They'll support you there. And I guess kind of moving forward a little bit more then, I want to know a bit more about the personal side of it, because obviously you said that you had experienced it. Is that correct, Charlotte?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. So my son is 8 now. So a while ago, for sure. But yeah, it still lives with me every day.
And what was the experience like for you, Charlotte?
So I suppose what I've talked about so far is kind of trying to get across what this condition is like, and not, my personal experience. But it was hellish for me. It really was that torture. I became very debilitated and completely isolated very, very quickly. I did not have a good experience with primary care professionals at all. I was dismissed numerous times. I was told that this is what pregnancy is. This is what you should have expected. It will go, it will go, it will go. Have you tried ginger? All the usual kind of things that you can imagine would be said to a woman, especially, as this was my first pregnancy. And I think that's something else to highlight as well, Faiza, is that when we start looking at data, not just about marginalized groups, it's young women who experience kind of very patronizing, well, you decided to get pregnant kind of, experience. It's older women who perhaps have used fertility treatment, like, well, you brought this on yourself. And I was kind of in that I was early 30s, so I wasn't, in my 40s, and I hadn't had that IVF treatment. Thankfully, I didn't need that. And I wasn't young. But even then, I'm a white woman. English is my first language. I was mid-30s, a professional, and they still looked at me like I was insane almost, like for daring to suggest that what I was experiencing wasn't normal. And I think to kind of highlight my personal experience, what that ended up doing was really significantly impacting my mental health, because what it did was made me feel like I was stupid, that I was weak, that I was making a fuss about something that I shouldn't be making a fuss of. And it made me feel like I then couldn't keep asking for help because everyone was just saying no. So eventually, your brain kind of goes, well, what's the point in asking anymore? Because everyone's just saying no. And that's a really dangerous place for a woman to be in, and that's definitely when she needs a partner or someone to advocate, because I think there's quite a lot of hope to start with, like, or maybe there is something that they can give me, and maybe there is a medication, and then when they don't and you run out of that hope and that kind of faith, it's what do you do?
Oh yeah, I completely hear you. And actually I do want to shine some light off the back of what you've just said. I've met lots of women who have suffered with hyperemesis, and in early pregnancy, it's impacted them to the point where they are unsure whether they'll be able to even keep the pregnancy going. And alternatively, I've met women who have gone through hyperemesis and then chosen not to have any more children after it.
Mm.
So, I mean, it's that debilitating, and it's so crucial, if there are any healthcare professionals listening, that we take it seriously. And that I've always felt with women when they're pregnant and having babies, the fact that they've chosen to keep the pregnancy, so whether they got pregnant off a whim or they were planning for a baby, the fact that they've chosen to keep the baby, you know, these are human beings with a brain that functions, and they've made an active choice for the vast majority of us to keep the baby. So I'm pretty certain, I'm not just certain, I know that they know what they are feeling. So it's so crucial that we listen to them. What are your thoughts on that? You know, the fact that there are women out there where in early pregnancy it can impact them to the point where they struggle to even have the concept of continuing the pregnancy.
Yeah, so we're talking about 5% of hyperemesis sufferers who have a wanted pregnancy. So this is very specific to the only reason they made that decision was because of the hyperemesis and not for another reason. And 5% is not a percentage that I like to talk about, because again, there are wanted pregnancies. And if any healthcare professionals are listening, look, this is the reality of the situation. Wanted pregnancy, please try everything that is available to you as a doctor and offer that. And it's still that woman's choice, of course, it's still that woman's decision. But we hear from women who were told there isn't any medication you can take, or they were offered something like cyclizine, which is quite a common first-line medication, and then that didn't work. And then they were told, sorry, that's all there is. And that isn't true. And we have guidelines that support the medications. And as we talked about, you know, start off with first line, fair enough. If they work, fantastic, because the side effects when you move up to second line, and let me be very clear about this, I'm talking about side effects for the mother, not for the fetus or the baby. All medication that is currently prescribed in the UK, we do know the risks and the benefits, and it's the mother. It's very much about what she's going to experience. So, for example, antihistamines can make you very sleepy and very drowsy. So the side effect of that obviously is that you won't be able to drive, or you might not be able to work, that kind of thing. So very much the impact on the mother. But let that woman try everything that is available and support her via that. And then, of course, still there will be women whose mental health has been so impacted that they do have to make that decision. But I want us to be in a position where we can say that women have a true choice, and I don't think that's where we are right now. I think there are women that make the decision to terminate a pregnancy because they genuinely have been told or believe that there is no other option for them, and that's a horrendous place to be, because that isn't true. And that's the bit that, you know, keeps me up at night, thinking about women being misinformed and then having to make a decision because they have no choice. They actually do think that they're dying because they feel like that, and that is the only option available to them. So yeah, it's very serious, that point, Faiza, and I just want all women to have an opportunity to go through every type of treatment, medication, support, everything, and then if they make that decision, we can say that as a collective we tried everything, right? But that's not what's happening currently across the UK.
I think it's so important that you said that, and I also love that you mentioned about the side effects, because we didn't actually touch on this earlier, that the side effects actually impact the mother as opposed to the babies. And I think that is probably something that bothers a lot of women. You know, how is it going to impact my baby? And ultimately, if you can get on top of your sickness and you can, you know, maintain nutrition, your baby will grow well. And that is crucial. That's how our babies get what they need to be able to thrive in our wombs. So that's probably a good point for us to probably come on to one of our final questions, because we finish in 6 minutes, and it's come around so fast, hasn't it? I feel like that every time. It just finishes way too quick. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions I think of afterwards. But you've already obviously mentioned the pregnant sickness support that you have. You have the national line, which I think is really a good one to mention. And I just want your final thoughts, and I lie, it's 50 seconds, Charlotte. Is there any final thoughts that you have in the next 45 seconds?
Sure. So just to finish off, really quickly, in 2018, we actually got our first medication for use for pregnancy sickness in the UK. So when we're talking about medications that aren't generally licensed for use, we do now have one. It's called Zombia. It's not available everywhere in the UK, but if any women are, concerned about medications not being licensed for use in pregnancy, then that one is. Pregnant sickness support is here. We have lots of information on the website. Do reach out. And finally, Faiza, really just to say, if anyone wants to become a volunteer, we have a peer support service. If you've had fibrosis before and you want to support women in the future,
thank you for
get in touch.
mentioning that. I'm so sorry, but we're 4 seconds to go and we've come to an end so much quicker than we
Stay
thought.
tuned to Salam Radio.